Started.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Good afternoon and welcome back to day 2 of the Strategies for Success, Effective Planning for Program Sustainability webinar. Yesterday, Dr. Julia Moore and Sophia Khan laid a great foundation to reframe how we think about sustainability, as well as how others we may work with may also view it. So today will be a more applied session and equally interactive training. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We'll be using a workbook throughout the training, so I will drop a link down in the chat box in a moment. Please take a moment to download if you have not done already. And we'll be using the annotate tool, and we'll provide instructions on how to use that. And finally, an early plug for the evaluation. We'll share that link at the end of the training. We encourage you to take a few minutes to share your feedback, as it's incredibly valuable to us. And with that, I will hand it to Sylvia and Dr. Moore.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And welcome back, everyone. It is so exciting to be here. And we're really excited to talk about today's topic because we're going to get even deeper into some very actionable strategies. So before Sylvia takes over and starts talking about partnering, we thought we would just set the stage to remember what we've covered so far and where we're going today. So we are doing 2 different workshops. And on Tuesday, we did a workshop where we talked about the key components of sustainability, different roles in the implementation system, and understanding and prioritizing different levers for change using a tool like the Program Sustainability Assessment Tool. If you did not get to participate in that one, it is being recorded and will be made available to you. Today, we're going to shift gears and talk in depth about characteristics of collaborative partnerships. We're going to deep dive into what we know about building trusting relationships and help you figure out how you can select some purposeful partnering strategies. So specifically, our objectives are all about those things. Describing these characteristics of collaborative partnerships, helping you identify potential partners, selecting purposeful partnering strategies, and thinking about how you can build trusting relationships in order to support sustainability. So just like our first session, we are going to have lots of interactive activities, annotation, and even a breakout session today. So we have 4 different activities to kind of break up some of the presentation and get your thoughts as we go. So with that, before we jump into talking about collaborative partnerships, we would like to start by doing a little bit of a recap in thinking about what did you take away from webinar 1? And getting input from you about what you found most useful and what resonated with you. So I'm going to go over 3 quick slides of kind of the key things we talked about, and then we will do a little annotation to get your thoughts and input about what resonated most. As I get into this, a few quick reminders. If you have not yet downloaded the workbook, highly recommend doing that. It's a great place to look at all the notes and the slides. The slides will also be available to you. For those of you who go on video, huge thanks. We really appreciate getting to see your faces as we present. So on Tuesday, we talked first about defining what it is that you're sustaining. Thinking about whether you are talking about sustaining the what, that program or intervention you're implementing, the how, the strategies you're using to support people to change their behavior, the outcomes and tracking those outcomes, how you're considering adaptations and what those look like over time. And then we talked a lot about different factors that affect sustainability, bringing it up front when we talked early on about kind of thinking about sustainability broadly. And then in detail, when we got into going through the program sustainability assessment. Then Sylvia talked about roles in the implementation system and how understanding these different roles can really give us a lay of the land of who is doing what in their roles in the implementation system. This is really the first piece in being able to have purposeful partnering strategies. And so we really made sure to do that on day one so that today, when we get into purposeful partnering strategies, you can be building on the map of the implementation system that you have. Finally, we talked about an example of one specific tool that you could use, the Program Sustainability Assessment Tool, that can help you plan for sustainability by assessing how you land on each of these 8 different categories to figure out which ones can be levers for change as you plan for sustainability. So, thinking about all of those different pieces, we would like you to pull out your annotation tools. And so reminder, in order to annotate, we want you to go, oh, perfect, thank you. So Taya has put the instructions in the chat box if you would like to see them there. At the top of your screen, it should say you're viewing Julia Moore's screen. Select view options right beside that, and a drop-down will show up. In that drop-down, you'll see the words annotate, and then you'll get a bar that shows up on your screen. Once you have a bar that shows up on your screen, perfect, I see stamps showing up, you can select the stamp tool or anything else and start putting stamps on the screen to describe which pieces resonated most with you. We also want to encourage you to type into the chat box or directly on the screen which aspects really resonated most. So what did you take away that you want to bring back to your team? You can literally write on the screen by selecting the text on your annotate bar, select text, and you can literally write on the screen so that it anonymously shows up for everyone to see. So take a moment here. And if you're having any issues, you can always chat to everyone or just to Sylvia, myself, or Taya, and we can add things directly for you. And if you start writing and it posts it before you're finished, you can just continue along. That happens to me all the time. And I'm able to move things around. So if someone finishes this sentence, I can move things there. I have one to add. Amazing. Actually, so what I think is so fabulous is to be honest, I don't know that I would have expected that roles in the implementation system would be your favorite part. You either, Sophie, I could tell. We love starting with roles in the implementation system, no matter what we are doing, because at the end of the day, all implementation work involves collaborative work with multiple different people. And so it is really, really exciting to see that that resonated with people so much. And it looks like this idea that sustainability isn't just about funding seemed to resonate a lot with people as well. So that is wonderful. So I'm going to clear this and jump into Sylvia's presentation. But I also want to remind everyone before we get into this, that if you have any questions, please, please, please type them in the chat box and we will flag them for the Q&A that we have at the end. So I know that sometimes people have questions or are afraid to ask, so you can ask them out loud, or you can send them just, I saw someone sent me a message just to me, so we can keep it nice and anonymous as well. So with that, Sophia, I am going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia. I just also want to flag that Judith said it's interesting to see a sustainability framework that is different from what I've been using in my sustainability workshop. If you wanted to type in the name of the framework you've been using, that would also be helpful just to share what you've been using. The framework that we show is a synthesis of different things that we've used over the years and also how we've experienced sustainability on the ground. And so we've kind of like taken this practice-based evidence and also evidence-based practice and kind of like put it together in order to develop that framework that we showed you. Okay, so we are talking about the characteristics of collaborative partnerships I'm going to put out a bit of look at the caveat here. I focused on community partnerships as my thesis. So I did a whole dissertation on partnerships. So if I go on and ramble on about it, you might have to hold me back. I love this topic. It's just so interesting. And I feel like partnerships, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, partners really are the foundation of what we do, of implementation, and things do not move forward without adequate relationships, which is why we wanted to do a whole workshop on collaborative partnerships. So what we discussed the last time we were talking about partnerships was that partnerships are foundational for sustainability. So if you remember the PSAT, the Program Sustainability Assessment Tool, partnerships is one of the factors related to sustainability. They are a huge sustainability lever. A lot of sustainability hinges on partnerships. So for example, when you're trying to get resources, when you are trying to foster organizational capacity, all of those things might actually hinge on partnerships, which is why we really wanted to do a deep dive. And often we enter partnerships for the purpose of sustainability. So that's a huge aim of partnerships. So motivations for entering partnerships due to sustainability include things like pooling resources. So for example, if we live in a resource constrained environment, perhaps we've run out of funding, perhaps there's not a lot of funding for what we want to do, we can partner with other people to pool those resources. A lot of people want to exchange knowledge, which is a huge motivation for entering a partnership and sustaining a program, because you want to have your finger on the pulse of what evidence is out there, what people are doing, and how people are adapting their interventions or implementing new EBPs as time goes on. Also, another motivation is increasing the legitimacy of your cause. So if you want to foster social change or political will, that's a huge sustainability lever, and often that actually rests on partnerships. So there are a ton of motivations for why partnerships are so key for sustainability. But here's another thing. Here's another objective for partnerships. Someone mentioned in the last webinar, I remember seeing that on the screen, that partnerships are also an outcome of your work sometimes, which means that they need to be sustained. So not only are we using partnerships to sustain our work, we're also trying to sustain partnerships. And so if you apply the same principles that we talked about in the last workshop, the fact that partnerships and relationships are dynamic means that the sustainability of them are also dynamic. And we can apply the same, like the adaptations, the what and the how and the outcome. That same framework can be applied to partnerships as an outcome. So that's just like an interesting thought that I had about partnerships, if partnerships actually are your outcome. So what we're going to be doing is talking about the factors that affect relationships between organizations. These are called relational processes in the literature. These include trust, learning, fairness, power, and legitimacy. And these are really the things that, the ways that we interact with one another and between organizations that really foster a good partnership that can impact sustainability. But I'm also going to be talking about specific aspects of those processes that can help lend sustainability to the partnership. I did a whole scoping review on sustaining partnerships. So a lot of what we learned about how to sustain partnerships can be put into these categories. So we're going to start first with trust. So trust, everyone's very familiar with it, and Julia's going to go into a deep dive about trust. So I'm not going to do too much of a definition of trust, but really it's that bonding, like it's the thing that really is the glue that holds us all together when we're entering partnerships. And so some of the things that actually impact the sustainability of partnerships that actually rely on trust include things like interdependence. So when we're trying to sustain partnerships have a long history and are maintained over a long time when organizations can rely on one another to do the best for one another. So there's a belief that your partners are acting in each other's best interests. There's also this kind of relationship where, like if you scratch your back, or my back, I'll scratch your back. So there's an interdependence there, and you foster that because you trust one another. And so that helps to maintain that relationship. Also, another sustainability factor is when there's accountability. So this could be formal or informal. So formal agreements to establish accountability to one another, like in terms of reference and other kinds of agreements, are the things that can help sustain partnerships. But also there are informal accountabilities, like we know you'll get this done. And that's trust-based. Like, I trust that you're going to do this. You're accountable to us. You're accountable to this cause. You're accountable to people in our community. So there's this informal accountability that really does help foster that partnership. Finally, establishing a shared goal and vision and articulating this. So not even just, having an implicit shared goal, but really out loud articulating, this is our common philosophy for joint working. And we're co-developing these relational goals because everybody needs to buy into something and people have to see where they're going together because you're fostering that relationship for a purpose. And so if there are clear goals, it's likely that you're going to have a trust-based relationship that's going to be maintained over time. So another relational process that is really key and important is learning. And learning is the idea that essentially we are learning from one another about our organizations, but we're also learning about the system, about the specific problem or challenge that we're all trying to address together. And so people or organizations that actually sustain their partnerships do a lot of knowledge exchange activities. In fact, learning is considered one of the foundational types of relationships when you're thinking about how to interact with one another in your partnerships. And if you think about new partnerships that you have, for example, if you go and are trying to reach out to a partner that you've never worked with before, the very first thing you tend to do with one another is learn from one another. It's not necessarily working together, but you're learning from one another. So what you're doing is you're exchanging new knowledge across organizational boundaries, and you're increasing knowledge about each organization's scope of work and work philosophy. So you're learning about who people in that organization are and what that organization does. And you're trying to increase your knowledge about the problem and each organization's approach to the problem. So there's a lot of knowledge exchange that happens in sustained partnerships. Another process that's very, very important is fairness. And so the fairness is the idea that there's reciprocity in your relationships. Reciprocity is incredibly important to establishing functioning relationships. And also, as you can imagine, reciprocity is related to trust as well. So these aren't, mutual, these aren't, discrete categories. These are all interconnected. And so sustained partnerships are ones in which organizations have a perceived positive value of actually participating in that partnership. So they can see that there's a benefit to that organization, because think about partnerships, they're really resource and time intensive. So if people aren't seeing a benefit, they kind of want to step out. So there has to be a positive value of being in this partnership. But not only that, organizations want to see that they have a meaningful role, that they're contributing to the relationship in some way. So it's not just that they're getting something out of it, but they want to feel like they're contributing to it. And so establishing that from the get-go, that everybody has a role and that everybody's able to contribute to this relationship in some way, and that people will benefit and organizations will benefit in some way as well, is really, really key for ongoing participation in that partnership. The next relational process is power. And so think about the kinds of partnerships that you've been in over the course of your long careers. Imagine what happens when there is an imbalance in power or a balance in power. This really, really impacts a lot of these other types of relational processes like fairness and trust. There has to be a balance of power in sustained partnerships in order to be able to ensure that partnership is maintained. So things like distributed leadership, when a partnership is too unbalanced and there's an obvious power differential, people want to step out of it. But if leadership is distributed, then people are more likely to stay in that partnership, as well as shared governance. And so when you talk about shared governance, you're talking about processes of shared decision-making. You're talking about transparent decision-making, so that decision-making isn't in closed spaces. It's quite open and people know how decisions are made. Those kinds of things really help to sustain partnerships. And finally, the very last process that is really key to sustaining partnerships and even establishing partnerships is legitimacy. So legitimacy is the idea that there is that the partnership that you have is legitimized by the external system, meaning your system partners, so for example, perhaps funders or your community, see your partnership as being really valuable to the community or to the system overall. And so when the external system sees that your partnership is really valued, it actually helps people who are part of that partnership stay in that partnership because it's now been legitimized. And so if relationships are seen as successful, this creates buy-in to join and maintain relationships. So legitimacy is one of those things that's really key to having that ongoing partnership and making sure that people see the value. So obviously it's connected to fairness, but there has to be a value from the external system that this partnership is actually a valid part of the system. So with that being said, we are going to launch into an activity. And this is an activity that is going to be in breakout rooms. So momentarily you will be spun off into breakout rooms. You're going to be in pairs. And what you're going to do in pairs is have a discussion for a few minutes about partnerships and identifying potential partners. And so if you go to page 22 of your workbook, there's a blank page in there that you can use to jot down some ideas that you're having in your discussion with your partner in your breakout room. But you can also just grab a pen and paper, or you can open up a Word doc or whatever on your computer and also type out your thoughts there. So this is the question. I'm going to copy the question into the chat. And the question that I have here for you to reflect on is to think about the specific implementation objectives that you have. So you can articulate what these are and identify the potential partners who can help you meet those objectives. So for example, if your implementation objectives are to to spread and scale an EVP that you are working on in your community, what are some of the potential partners, or who are some of the potential partners who can help you meet those objectives? What are some of the relational processes you can leverage? So trust, learning, fairness, power, legitimacy in order to engage with those partners. And if you already have partnerships with people, so these are existing partnerships, how might you sustain the partnerships based on what you've heard? So there are two questions. If they're new partners, what are the kinds of things you can do, and what kind of relational processes can you engage in? And if they're older partners, people you've already worked with, how will you sustain that relationship based on what you've heard? So any questions before we start? I see Valerie saying I'm only available to chat because my computer does not have a mic. Okay. So,
and well, Sylvia, can I jump in a couple logistical things? So one thing is, and I know some people are currently planning for sustainability. So people can be thinking about who are the partners specifically for sustainability, or as Sylvia said, how can you sustain those partnerships? I know some people may or may not be able to chat out loud. So you can always type when you are communicating with people. So you can do that as well. And because it's just gonna be two people in a breakout room. And the other thing is, if you are having any issues in your breakout room, you can jump back into the main room. For example, if you're in a breakout room and the other person doesn't show up within kind of a minute, you can come back to the center room and we can help you with that. And I think we're gonna have about 8 minutes in the breakout room and then kind of share a couple thoughts when we get back, right?
Awesome. So I have copied the question into the chat. I'll do it again just in case, but you should all still be able to see the question in the chat if you wanted to access it. And again, you can go to page 22 of your workbook to jot down some thoughts. And so you will momentarily be spun off somewhere else into a breakout room to chat with somebody who's a colleague, perhaps, or a peer of yours.
All right, everyone should be going off to breakout rooms now.
So we have most people back. How was it? Everyone having a good time in the breakout rooms? What we're going to do now is spend maybe just a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Just if you wanted to use your annotation tool, you could write some reflections that you had during your breakout discussion onto this whiteboard that Julia is currently sharing on the screen. So same rules about annotation. You can just go click on view options And when you click on view options, it will, you can click on annotate, and then there will be a toolbox that is unlocked. And you've been using the stamp tool, but one of the tools is actually the text tool. So if you actually, I'm going to just demonstrate here. So if you select the text tool, you can actually just type directly on the screen and everybody can see. And the great thing about it is that it's anonymous. So nobody knows who's actually writing what. So if you wanted to share some thoughts you had, we're going to put this up for a few minutes. But we already have people saying good ideas about participating in existing community coalitions, the role of champions for your program.
And people can write to us. Someone just texted me or messaged me. You can also do message us and we can write it in for you.
Speaking of knowledge exchange, it sounds like people are we're trading some good tidbits about their partnerships. Yes, partnership building takes a lot of time, for sure. Ooh, I like that. Going with the attitude of we have a common goal. What do we need to do to achieve it? As opposed to we're the experts and know what you should do. Exactly. I think the common goal approach really does make a huge difference. Participate in different events being sponsored, hosted by community partners. Oh yeah, you can always type in the chat box as well. Patricia says, it ended quickly, but I received great advice on being persistent and patient while building partnerships. That's great. Leticia says private donors and donations. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks. Ooh, let's see. Yeah, I was just going to do that. Great conversation. Working with bigger organizations to support our mission and allow funding support. Yeah, exactly. Great advice to be persistent, participate at different events. Equity and reciprocity are so important. Truly, reciprocity is very important. And that's something that I have done a lot of community work, and that's definitely something that is really, really important. So that idea of balanced power and fairness, depending on what kind of people you're working with in terms of your community members, is really key to building trust and really great partnerships. Do fun stuff with your partners. Yes, that's actually really, really key. So do fun stuff. It shouldn't all be work, is even for teams, and not even just your partners, but even your own teams. Do fun stuff with people. It can make or break partnerships and the trust that you build between your own team members. Communicate with partners and letting them know what your expectations are is huge. People had such great conversations. I kind of wish I listened in on that. It's too bad that we didn't get to hear that. We worked with parents one-on-one who have advocated on behalf to get our program into schools. That's great. And so you probably have a lot of tips for how to engage with parents and to partner with parents as well. That's awesome. Kindness and reliability are a great way to start. Trust is very important. Okay, that's a great segue.
I mean, that like could not be more perfect. So hold on, I'm going to save this so we can share it with everyone after. I'm going to close this down and start sharing again. So yes, trust is very, very important. And we are going to talk specifically about trust right now. So there we go. All right. So we're going to talk about kind of what the science of building trusting relationships tells us. So I've become kind of passionate, slightly obsessed with understanding trust over the past year. And one thing that is kind of mind-blowing to me is every single person needs to build trusting relationships to exist in work, in life. And no one ever teaches us what it actually means to build trust, or what trust even is, or how to do it more effectively. And I think that once we realize how to build trusting relationships, how to cultivate trust, it sets us up for success, sustainability success, and success in so many other aspects of working with other people. And so I'm going to talk, in fact, quite briefly, I only have 2 slides, but I'm going to talk about what we know about the science of trust and how you can use this to build trusting relationships. So the very first thing is recognizing that there are 4 different kinds of trust: strategic trust, intra-organizational or group trust, and inter-group trust, and then personal trust. So strategic trust is about whether you trust or believe in the thing you're working on. So for example, all of you are funded to implement an intervention related to adolescent pregnancy prevention. And so strategic trust could look like, do you believe that this program is going to lead to positive outcomes? That's an example of strategic trust. And I have worked with groups who have deep strategic trust. So even though they have lots and lots of barriers, they deeply believe that what they are doing is going to have an impact. But I've also worked with groups who blatantly say, I'm working on a project and I don't even believe it's going to work. And that means that they're lacking that strategic trust. Second, we have intra-organizational or intra-group trust. That really just means, do people trust each other within the team? So if you don't like the intra-inter, this is really within group trust. So do you trust the other people that are on your team? Then we have inter-organizational or intergroup trust. So do you trust people in other organizations? Do you trust people in other departments? Do you trust people on other groups, maybe within your organization or across other organizations? And finally, we have personal trust. Do you trust someone else? And does that person trust you? Personal trust really feeds into inter and intra-organizational trust. So there are additional aspects related to those within group and between organization pieces, but we're going to focus today here on factors that affect personal trust, because they really affect all the different pieces. Because at the end of the day, even if you're talking about 2 organizations trusting each other, there's actual people involved in that relationship. So when we think about personal trust, there's really 3 key factors that affect trust: competence, authenticity, and empathy. So essentially, we trust other people, and they are more likely to trust us when we believe they are competent. Competent means we think they're reliable, we think they're accountable. Essentially, we think that they're going to do what they said they were going to do, and they're going to do a good job. I was recently asked to do a presentation with someone else that I hadn't worked with very closely before. And as I was working with him, I started questioning his competence, both in terms of what exactly he was going to say and whether he was going to get information to me on time, because I hadn't seen a lot of reliability, right? We had internal deadlines. It was like, oh, send me this by Friday. And Friday would come and go, the weekend would come and go, and I wouldn't get anything. And so it was a new relationship, and I was growing to not trust this person because they didn't demonstrate competence. They weren't showing me, hey, I'm showing up and I can do a good job at what I'm supposed to do. So sometimes we don't trust people because we don't think they have competence. Second is authenticity. We are far more likely to trust people when we think they are showing up authentically. That means that they are showing up and showing us their true motives. And especially when we don't think that they have ulterior motives that they're hiding. Embedded in authenticity are other important things like, do we think this person has appropriate boundaries? So, those situations where you like someone, but it feels like they overstep boundaries, maybe sharing too much information or getting too personal. They kind of have a lack of boundaries in what they're doing. That kind of makes us question their authenticity. Other things that can make us question people's authenticity are things like how much they share confidential information. So both, if they start sharing confidential information with us, it often makes us question, hey, are they going to share my confidential information with somebody else? And we trust them when they have integrity. So a big part of authenticity is, do they have integrity? Do we believe that they have integrity? So we trust other people and they trust us when they have competence, authenticity, and finally, when they have empathy. This is about the connection you build with somebody else. When you feel like you have some shared common goals or interests or some kind of connection that you have, you're far more likely to trust them. Within that piece are things like being non-judgmental. So when we feel like people are being judgmental, we kind of trust them a little bit less because we're worried about what that judgment will mean. When we think that people have generosity in attribution, so essentially when we think that they're kind of going to assume the best rather than assume the worst in us, we're more likely to trust them. And finally, when we think that people are able to really take our perspective, to have that empathy and take our perspective, even if they don't agree with us, we are far more likely to trust them. And so these are all components of what makes up trust between different people. And so what we're going to do now is go through a little activity where we're going to annotate again. And when we go through and annotate, we're going to go through some scenarios and get you to think about what was causing trust or a lack of trust in this scenario. Was it a competence issue or kind of a pro? Did it have to do with authenticity or did it have to do with empathy? Before I jump in that, I see that there are lots of things in the chat box. Just want to make sure there aren't any key things to address before I jump in. Awesome. Yeah, wonderful reflections. Perfect. So with that, we're going to get everyone to pull back out your annotation tools. So remember, up at the top of your screen, view options, hover down, select the annotate tool. And I'm going to pull mine out. So first scenario that we have for you. Imagine I have a new director of an organization that has reached out to partner with us. And every time I speak with her, it feels like she has this hidden agenda. I have even asked about her agenda and her goals, but it feels like she's not being transparent. And this is based on a true scenario, which I'm probably not the only one to have experienced something quite like this. Fabulous. So yeah, so lots and lots of people putting it in authenticity. So this is primarily about authenticity because when we believe someone has a hidden agenda and they're not sharing their goals or their motives, we question their authenticity. We question whether they are being authentic with us. All right, example number 2. After only a couple of meetings, I was very impressed with the lead's experience, knowledge, and skills. What is this? Exactly. So this is an example of competence. So I believe in their experience, their knowledge, their skills. I am trusting them because I believe in their competence. All right, third scenario. During a meeting with the evaluator and community partners, I became concerned about how the evaluator pushed for community partners to collect data. The evaluator didn't consider their perspective or acknowledge how challenging data collection is right now. So again, based on a true scenario related to asking community partners to collect data in the middle of the pandemic, and how challenging that really is. And so what is happening here? Fabulous. So lots of people saying empathy. And so big part of this has to do with empathy, their inability to take the perspective of community partners. And I actually also really like this circle, or this heart right here in the center between empathy and competence, because I think it also would make me, if this did make me question the evaluator's competence, because if they can't see the perspective of community partners, and they're not able to really assess what is happening right now, it makes me kind of question, well, are they really a great evaluator? Because that doesn't necessarily seem feasible and realistic. So number 4, one of the implementation team members seems overconfident. She rarely asks questions and never admits when she doesn't know things. Where would you place this one? Oh, and so Judith has a comment about how evaluators can be more realistic. And I want to share that this is literally one person, not all evaluators in general, but literally one person that we were working with who came and was kind of expecting unrealistic things at that moment in time. So I think that this, we're not generalizing, but really focusing on one particular person potentially. So this one's cool because we have more diversity in what's coming out here. So when people seem overconfident, I attribute this very much where people are going. Sometimes it makes me question their competence. In fact, for me personally, the thing that helps me build confidence in people's competence is when they admit they don't know things and they ask good questions. And so oddly, asking good questions makes me trust somebody else's competence even more. And sometimes, depending on the scenario, when people seem overconfident, it makes me wonder also, well, are they really being authentic? And both to me and maybe even within themselves, do they realize that they're being overconfident in the situation? And why are they kind of overcompensating for things? So for me personally, I would place this first kind of in this competence, but depending on our interactions, I might start to get into some of this authenticity. All right, so now we have 2 more, and we're going to get you to do a little self-reflection. So I want you to think about a situation where you have experienced a lack of trust with someone else. So you don't trust them very much and they don't trust you. Don't say their name, totally anonymous. What factors affected your trust? So why did you not really trust them? Thinking about these pieces. So why don't you trust them? Ooh, lots of people right in the middle, lack of confidence, empathy, and authenticity. But by far, the most common one is people saying that they weren't confident the other person was being authentic. Sobi and I have presented on trust a lot of times in the past year, and this is always the number one reason people state that they don't trust somebody else. Always, we've never presented that wasn't true.
There's a lot in the overlap here between authenticity and empathy too.
There is, yeah, which is very, very interesting. So now we have one last one. So thinking about that exact same situation. Why do you think the other person doesn't trust you as much. So why is it that you don't think that the other person trusts you? So again, it's so interesting because we have done this a lot of times. And every time we ask this question, the number one reason people feel that others don't trust them has to do with a feeling that they don't trust your competence. And so if we just think about that for a second, we've done this with hundreds of people over and over and over again. And often people feel like, I don't trust somebody else because I'm not sure if they're being authentic. But people are saying, I don't think people trust me because I don't think they trust my competence. And one of the things Sophie and I have reflected on a lot is maybe part of that has to do with the importance of really expressing our authenticity, because almost no one, a few people put it over here, that it was about authenticity. But I think there's a huge opportunity right here to really be explicit about our goals and our motives. Especially, remember, we're here talking about sustainability planning. So as you think about sustainability planning, what can you do to be open about your goals, your motives, your intentions in sustainability planning? And then the other big tip I'll give you about competence, as I mentioned it before, is oftentimes what we do to prove our competence is we do more, we say more. But in fact, being able to say less, ask questions, and summarize what we're hearing from other people is actually very, very, very powerful in helping build people's belief that we are competent. But I also want to share that often we aren't, how do I say this? Often we question whether other people believe our competence, but they actually do, right? The research shows that's actually not the primary driver. But we question it because we're not all great at saying, hey, I think this other person on our group, on our team is really competent and bringing something unique to the table. So anytime you can do that, it's a great opportunity to foster trust. I also noticed Amanda had a fabulous comment in the chat box, and Sylvia just responded. And Sylvia, do you want to speak to the response you just gave?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the way that I see this framework is that it's like the first pass at understanding what a source of mistrust or trust might be. And so, for example, like Julie and I've used this a lot to be like, I don't trust this person, but I don't know why, right? And then like, if you use this, you're like, okay, well, there's definitely an authenticity issue here. But I think like I think that's the first pass, but we do have to understand, okay, well, what's the source of that? Like, why do we think they're not being authentic? And I think understanding what colors that, like, like where does that perception of being inauthentic come from? What other factors might impact that? What other factors lead to mistrust that actually feed into each of these factors listed here? That's kind of like the second deeper dive into it. And that really, we're going to talk about mental models, but that really makes you question your mental models as well as the structures and systems around you that kind of lead to this point where you are, mistrusting people, or maybe you trust them a lot.
Definitely. So one final piece before we jump into purposeful partnering strategies and mental models. So if you could share on the screen, again, using the text box tool now, or you can type it into the chat box, what might be some things that you could do differently? For example, right now, as you think about planning for sustainability with some of your partners, either with someone you already have a trusting relationship with, because you can always build on that, people you maybe have a pretty neutral relationship with, or where you want to work on fostering more trust. So you can type right onto the screen or into the chat box. And again, yeah, you can type directly to us if you would prefer.
I love that people are using the stamps to react to
Yeah.
statements too. That's great.
And there's some nice clear themes here about expectations, laying out goals and motives, consistency, getting to know people, meeting them where they are, highlighting unique contributions, transparency, and yeah, and then having some of the challenges when we're building new relationships. Oh my goodness, this person has, it's almost hidden from mine. Admit mistakes and don't get defensive. I want to highlight or heart that one 100 times. I think that that's really, really, really key. They show in the research about building trust. Communicating more often. Fabulous. All right, so with this, I'm going to clear these. I've saved them. We'll share them back. I'm going to clear this, and Sylvia can jump into partnering strategies.
Yeah, so it seems like you all are a very action-oriented group, which is not surprising at all. So now we're going to talk about some of this action. We reflected a lot. We've thought a lot about relationships and the different aspects of relationships. We did a deep dive into trust. And now we're going to talk about some of the things you can do. And I mean, up to this point, many of you already have some great suggestions. And I feel like there's a lot we can learn from one another. So we're going to talk a bit about some of these strategies that can help you with purposeful partnering. So in terms of the process of picking targeted strategies, it helps to understand why something is a challenge in the first place. So if you know that there is either a huge roadblock or that you're experiencing some tension, or perhaps you want to reach out to somebody new that you've never actually worked with before, and it might be a bit difficult to do so because you don't know them, there's something that's keeping you in the way of doing the things you need to do related to your partnerships. And so doing that deep dive, like you just did in the last activity, can really unpack some of those underlying things that are affecting relationships and partnerships. And so asking the question, why is this the way it is? What are some of the factors that are leading to this? And then using some categorization framework to try to make sense of what's happening is helpful. So for example, we talked about these interorganizational processes, which, to refresh your memory, it was trust, learning, fairness, legitimacy, and power. So you could always say, okay, well, I'm having these different barriers and facilitators related to this relationship and this partnership that I'm trying to form or to maintain. And this barrier or facilitator actually, it taps into the specific process, like trust or like fairness or like power. And then once you're able to kind of take these challenges that you're having, these underlying barriers and facilitators, and you categorize them by the type of inter-organizational process, you can come up with some strategies that will help you overcome that. So I'm going to give you some examples over the next few slides. So just a reminder, trust, learning, fairness, power, and legitimacy are the things that I talked about earlier. And so if we start off with trust, we just did a deep dive about trust, and many of you had some great strategies on that whiteboard activity that we just did. And a lot of the strategies that you had actually tap into the ones that are on this list right here. So this list comes from the literature, but also just from our experience of working with different communities. And so if you're having trust issues and you've identified, okay, well, we're having these challenges and these challenges are trust issues, some of the things that you can do are understand where your partners are coming from, what they believe in, and what's important to them. And so somebody had written on the whiteboard, meeting them where they are. And that's essentially what you're trying to do, is meet them where they are and to really, really try to understand them. And that involves a lot of conversation. And so, that's something that somebody also said, is that you can't just like go out and expect to work with people. You have to talk to them. There has to be discussion, and there has to be a level of understanding. Some of that formal accountability stuff, like creating MOUs, like memorandums of understanding between organizations, can really, really help. Have a North Star. So I was doing some overdose prevention implementation initiatives with communities, and they had this language around have a North Star, which really is your shared vision and your guiding principles. And when you have your North Star, it's always like this touch point. And it's something that people, if you're in a meeting and you're saying, well, let's talk about our North Star again, it's easy for people to kind of like ground themselves in that North Star because everybody has a common sense of what that is. Speaking about what a common sense of something is, you use collective language. And so you have to speak the same language, pay attention to the words that people use, develop a common vocabulary. So this is the common way that we talk about the problem or the solution. It's important to use similar language because that shows this, like this bonding and the sense of, we're all in this together. Language is incredibly important. So often what I do is I go into a situation and I listen to how people are talking about things. And if I agree with the way that they're talking about things, I mirror their language, and that somehow fosters better conversations because everybody's on the same page. And also being flexible. So include flexibility in your structures to meet each other in the middle. So not being too rigid, not saying this is the way it's supposed to go, but having that flexibility to meet people where they are really, really does foster trust. So if learning is an issue, so let's say you want to foster better learning and knowledge exchange across, different organizations that you're partnering with, this happens to be the easiest problem to target. And I'm sure many of you are already doing a lot of learning. The advice is to be clear about what your objectives are. So learning is huge. You can learn about a ton of different things, but there are different things that when you're trying to partner with people that you have to learn about. You're learning about the other organization. So what is their scope, their mandate? Who do they work with? How do they work? So learning more about that organization. You're learning about the context or the system that you're all working in. And you're also learning more about the problem. So you could be learning more about, for example, the specific problem and the EBPs, the solutions that are being used in order to address that problem. Examples of some common learning strategies include things like inviting experts or presenters to your meetings. So if you're trying to learn more about the problem, then you're inviting these people to come and share, for example, evidence. Community dialogues are huge. I love community dialogues just to have people talk about the context, have people talk about the problem. And also a lot of learning about other organizations happens at a community dialogue. Something like an organizational Tinder, quote unquote. This is an idea that came up because I was working with a community that was huge. It was actually a city, and there are multiple organizations in the city that were all trying to work together. And some of them didn't even know that the others existed. And so what they did was they compiled what we call the organizational Tinder, which is just a bio of each of these organizations that are part of this network. And they put it on a website, and people were able to kind of scroll through these bios and say, oh, I didn't even know this was the scope of this organization and their mandate. And so it's helpful to just know what organizations are even out there. or a journal club, just so you understand more about the evidence and you're able to discuss and talk about it. I see a lot of activity in the chat right now. People that said they have a North Star. That's a good point, Judith. And so that's a very specific thing that was used in the community that we're working with, but obviously you use whatever kind of like analogy would be culturally relevant, right? Exactly. So some strategies related to fairness. So people who, when you want to figure out what people want to get out of a partnership and how they'd like to contribute, you do a stakeholder analysis, which sounds really like fancy, but it really just means, what do the stakeholders want out of the relationship? How do they want to partner? You have to have a conversation with them. And so essentially what you're asking them about is, how do you expect to benefit from this partnership? And what do you want to contribute? Those are the two main aspects of fairness, and you have to have conversations around that. So just ask. So you can do pulse checks. So I've heard people talk about having one-on-ones and doing one-on-ones with their partners over maybe once every few months, just to say, hey, how are things going? How are you feeling about this? What's going on? Do you want to step up your role? Do you want to step down your role? And what would make your partnership more meaningful? And a lot of people bring this up as well at larger meetings. So I think just doing that discussion, asking people how they want to contribute and doing that on a regular basis can really help sustain partnerships and to also foster partnerships for sustainability. Power. So a lot of these strategies are directly related to fairness. So you want to understand how people want to contribute in order to understand how to contribute power and shared governance. Not everybody wants a lot of power. So not everybody wants to be the decision maker. Not everybody wants to, engage at a high level of power with everyone else. So it does help to know how people want to contribute in the first place before you start doing things that rearrange power. But some of the key strategies that people have used are doing things like rotating chairs, for example. So rather than having the same chair all the time, you rotate chairs. You share agenda. You have a shared agenda setting for meetings. And so it's not always one organization who's always setting the agenda for meetings. It's a combination of multiple people who are able to put their input in the agenda. When you're working with many different organizations, so let's say it's a network, having working group structures where there are different organizations that are the leads for the different working groups can really help, because then it feels like everyone's able to contribute in different ways and they're able to lead things in different ways. You also have to help to formalize how decisions will be made based on partner preferences. So this is where you really have to listen to what your partners want and to have some transparency in how you're making decisions. And, do people want a majority vote? Do you want it to be consensus based? Well, how will you make decisions? All of those things have to be based on preferences and how people want to participate in the decision-making process. And then you want to formalize how decisions are documented and communicated to people. So how are they communicating decisions to partners and funders, and what does that even look like? Finally, there's legitimacy. So you want, in order to establish external legitimacy, so remember, external legitimacy is how the system sees your partnership. It depends on how well your team members work together and the impact you've made collectively. So when you establish external legitimacy, usually what you're doing is doing things like documenting your successes and doing a dissemination and communication activity to your external stakeholders. So you can craft messages about the resources or processes that you developed, the positive outcomes that you have achieved, and also stories. People love storytelling. It's a really, really helpful tool to talk about the strength of your partnerships and not only what the partners get out of your relationship, but also the kinds of outcomes that have been achieved in the community, and to hear from community partners about their success stories as well. So those are the things that really help to really legitimize that partnership from an external point of view. So there are tons of strategies. That's not an exhaustive list. Obviously, many of you have been working in communities for several years, and you probably have many other strategies. But I think the point is really thinking about, okay, well, I have these strategies. What are they really tapping into? Are they tapping into power, trust, fairness? Because that can really help you make sense of the strategies that you're using and why they are effective or not effective in certain cases. One common element that often comes up when you're talking about partnerships and strategies for partnerships is mental models. Mental models essentially refers to this idea that we all carry a specific worldview that's informed by things like our culture, our upbringing, and all these other factors that make us think about a certain way about problems and also about how we tackle problems. And so there could be partners who are targeting the exact same problem, but have completely different mental models about why people are facing a challenge and what to do about it. So, for example, we know that teen pregnancy might be problematic, but people have different ideas about the causes and what needs to be done to address it. And that's often where we start having tensions or where we start having different ideas about how we're actually supposed to tackle the problem. So if you're working in a situation where you need to reach out to partners, but you're not sure what their mental models are and you need to explore it, there's a set of questions that you can ask. And these are the questions that are on the screen right now. Your mental models are your beliefs and what you believe should happen, your beliefs about a problem and what you believe the solutions are or the actions are in order to tackle that problem. So when you're trying to delve into mental models, you might ask things like, what do we believe are the causes of this problem? We know this is a problem. We've agreed that this is a problem, but what do we believe are the causes of the problem? And when you have multiple people around the table and they start actually articulating what the causes are, you might either see that the people's beliefs about the causes of the problem are the same or completely different. Another important question is, how do we believe the problem can be solved? Then you want to start asking about tasks. So what is our long-term vision for our work together? And what can we do right now, this moment, to help us get there? And so this is where you start seeing either similarities or differences between how people think they should tackle a problem. So mental models are incredibly helpful to really explore to see where there might be some similarities or differences between partners. And if there are differences, then you really have to think about, is this a partner that we can work with because, perhaps their mental models are completely different from yours, or if you have to work with them to find some sort of common ground that you're able to move forward together with in order to be able to do the work that you need to do. So the other piece here is, if you want to think about mental models, is that you can use this other framework that helps you to understand how to delve into stakeholder perspectives. And we have used this a ton. So we, for example, might talk about values and what our stakeholders value. What are the things that people care about the most? So when I think about, for example, my values, I might think, oh, well, I totally believe in inclusivity and equity and meeting people where they are. Another thing that can help you understand people's perspectives are loyalties. So who are people loyal to? Who are they committed to? What are they committed to in terms of ideas or institutions or people? And so, for example, I'm very loyal to people who do implementation and practice. And all of my work is guided by what people do in practice. And I don't really have a loyalty to the academy or to a specific field, but it's really the people who are doing these things in practice. Another thing that can help you understand people's perspectives is what they stand to lose. Because whenever we're trying to enact change, people lose something in the process. So for example, status or autonomy or resources. So what do people stand to lose? Because when they experience loss, that's when you start seeing that there might be resistance in some way. And we can also try to understand what they stand to gain. How do they benefit from what we're trying to do? And that can also inform their perspectives and how they interact with people and also enter into partnerships. So when we can understand people's perspectives in that way, what we can do is we can actually map this out. So for example, if you have a central problem or issue that you want to address regarding partnerships, and you want to understand these different stakeholder perspectives, you can see who's around the table. So they could be people or organizations, and you can map out their values, losses, loyalties, and benefits. and see where there's points of convergence and where there may be complete disparities between those stakeholders. And where there are disparities, then you can think, okay, well, now I know why we're having this clash, and let's have discussions to try to figure out what to do about this and to communicate to one another in a way that really targets those specific things. So with that, we're going to go straight into an activity. So we're actually running out of time. So in this activity, we are, I'm going to put this scenario, it's in your workbook on page 32, but I'm also going to put it in the chat box. So here we go. So the scenario is this: there's a community-based organization, an evaluator, and a school principal who are all working together. There's tension between the community-based organization, the external evaluator, and the school principal. These are our three stakeholders. The community-based organization is very experienced. Ooh, I don't think I posted this to everybody in the meeting. Here we go. The community-based organization is very experienced at implementing multiple programs. They're more focused on implementation than evaluation. They believe evaluation is important, but find the data not very helpful. The evaluator has a specific evaluation plan and approach that they would like to use, and the school principal does not want the evaluator coming in for entry or exit surveys. So they're all working on this thing together, but they might have different values, accountabilities, losses, and benefits depending on what's going on and what kind of stakeholder they are. So in this activity, what you're going to do, so I've posted the scenario in the chat. It's also on page 32 of your workbook. So we're going to talk about values. When you think about the community-based organization, what does it seem like they value the most based on the description that you have in the scenario? This is whatever information you have in the scenario, what would you say they value the most? So we have a few people saying helping the community. There we go. Okay, so people are saying helping community, and a few people have said student and teacher experience and outcomes. Definitely, it seems like they want to help the community, and in the process, perhaps they also want to, because they want to help the community, they also want to ensure that the students and teachers do have a good experience and that their outcomes are good and appropriate. So then, if you think about the evaluator, what do you think the evaluator values the most? So we're seeing rigorous evaluation methods. Definitely. So the evaluator wants to go in and make sure they're doing the evaluation right, and they have an approach, and they just want to use that. Okay. What about the school principal? What does the school principal value the most? Exactly. Student and teacher experience and outcomes. So here we have three stakeholders and three sets of values that could have some overlap, but definitely they are distinct in some ways. And so now we think about accountabilities. So who do we think the community-based organization is accountable to? Program funder and the superintendent, students, parents, and teachers. Definitely. What about the evaluator? So the program funder, but definitely there's a separate funder for the evaluation. So they're pretty accountable to that funder. And finally, the school principal. when somebody said their professional association standards, that's definitely another accountability. So school principal, superintendent, students and parents, teachers, and program funders. So I wonder if we should stop the activity there just so we have a few more minutes for questions, because we do finish at 4:30. But the whole point of this activity is that you have a scenario, you have this challenge, there are different stakeholders around the table. And if you think about values, loyalties, losses, and benefits, it can really help you look at the overlap between those across stakeholders or whether there are disparities. So obviously the outlier here feels like it's the evaluator who has completely different values and accountabilities. And there seems to be some overlap between the community-based organization and the school principal, which means that a lot of the tension is probably not coming from that end, but from the evaluation end. And so this is just it kind of helps you delve into partnerships and why partnerships are the way they are, and really helps you understand those mental models. So with that being said, we've come to the end of our workshop number 2. So in workshop number 1, we went over the key components of sustainability, roles in the implementation system. We talked about understanding and prioritizing levers for change. And we today took a deep dive into collaborative partnerships. So we talked about sustaining partnerships, but also partnerships as a mechanism of sustainability. We went deep into trust, and then we also talked a lot about strategies. So with that being said, we have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask, anything burning. We also had some great insights in the chat, some very, very good insights in the chat.
People are always welcome to type questions to everyone, just to us, or even post them on the screen. I also wanted to flag, because there were some equity questions that came up. We never mentioned before, but next week we actually have a free event on equity and implementation and some practical guidance to embed equity and key questions. So if anyone wants to sign up, it's a totally free event happening next Tuesday. And it is at the top of that page, because it sounds like that is a consideration for many of you right now.
If you have a question and you don't want to type it in the chat or come off of mute, you could always type it, use the annotation tool and type it on the screen if you want to, or just send it directly to one of us.
Taya, I think that you're going to jump in and ask for evaluation stuff. But before you do that, can I just say an absolutely massive thank you for your engagement, for both annotating and then especially for the thoughts, reflections, and comments that you posted when we were doing whiteboards and typing text boxes, because I thought that was really, really fabulous. We will send copies of those screenshots when people are typing words, because I think that they were pretty powerful stories about all the ideas that you have. And so really good luck, lots of luck in your next phases, either for new funding, because it sounds like some of you are going that way, and for sustaining all of the fabulous work that you have been doing. And thank you so much for hanging out with us for a couple of days.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
We'll be hanging out till 4:30 if anybody does have burning questions, but I know people are leaving, they have to go. Sorry, Ty. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you to you both for the wonderful training, and thanks to our grantees for joining us. We hope that you received practical information as well as tools to further support implementation of adulthood preparation subjects in your planning. I do want to pause for a moment to see if the FISB staff, Liberator, if you have any closing comments that you'd like to share. And if not, that's okay. We also have our evaluation link, which is in the chat box. Please take a moment to complete the evaluation. As you know, that feedback is super important for us and helpful for us in identifying potential training. So again, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next training. And we'll hang on for a few minutes just to, in case there are any final questions that folks have to make use of our full training time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 4:30. So for those that are still on, thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you at our next training. Take care.